Trek Favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. I want to know what yours are, and I want to know what the favorite that we're going to be talking about today is with my guest, Mr. John Champion of Mission Log. John, welcome. It's good to see you.
It is great to see you, Chuck. Always a pleasure to chat. And, we get to see each other at Vegas every year. And now it's always exciting to know that somebody has started a Star Trek podcast and sort of, making that family even bigger than it has been. So this is cool. This is a really exciting thing to be able to do with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's one of those things, and as I've told the listeners before, one of the inspirations for this was the lightning round on Mission Log Live, where people would say they would pick something. You give them a choice, and they pick something, and then my next question is, why did they pick that? And so,
right.
Hopefully, at times, we can do that with full episodes and have a little fun with it.
Yeah.
So I asked you to pick something out of the entire Star Trek catalog, and you picked Season 3, Episode 12 of Voyager, which is Mortal Coil.
Yes.
So naturally, I went and watched it to be sure that I remembered everything and all. And I thought this was a very interesting pick from you because I'm curious as to whether we will get into deep meanings or just there's something that particularly resonated with you about this.
I think it's all about the deep meaning for that episode. Partly I wanted to pick something that was a little off the wall, that it was not an obvious choice for me or for other Star Trek fans. I mean, I think that the best episodes, the most popular episodes of Star Trek are that for a reason. When you go back to TOS and you look at something like City on the Edge of Forever, or when you go to Next Gen and you look at The Measure of a Man or Best of Both Worlds, they are iconic because they've earned that. They really have. And for people who follow Mission Log and know that we've covered TOS, TNG, the animated series, the movies, and we're right now in the first half of Deep Space Nine, I wanted to pick something to talk about that was from far outside of that experience. And I had watched all of Voyager, not in its first run, actually. It was after the fact and had it on DVD. Watched all of it. Definitely it's a show that has its high points and its low points, same with Enterprise, but I'm still a fan of both, partly because I'm a fan of Star Trek overall, but partly because I think there is value in the strong episodes of those shows. I went further off the wall by picking an episode of Voyager that features Neelix. And Neelix is not necessarily one of those top fan favorite characters. Look, every character in Star Trek has fans. But again, when you think about the iconic, you think about the captains, you think about first officers, you think about, from Voyager, you think about the captain, you think about Seven of Nine, you think about Tuvok. Neelix is not necessarily a character that comes to mind right away as the fan favorite. So this was going way out on a limb to pick something that features him, that again is from a series that is not necessarily as beloved as some of the others, as iconic as some of the others, but I think it's got a lot to say, and that's really what the appeal was for me. Was to choose something that is thoughtful and deep.
Okay, so you've never died and come back to life.
I haven't, that I know of. I mean, look, yeah.
I thought it was interesting the way that the Borg technology was introduced. Neelix's reaction to being treated with the Borg technology. That was one level, and then of course we get into the level where he's grappling with: is there an afterlife? Is there not an afterlife? And that's where, I mean, we're off into really theological stuff that I'm not sure that any of us are prepared to deal with. But then to come back around and almost try to find some kind of new meaning, regardless of what his conclusions are about an afterlife.
Yeah, I think this was really critical about it. I mean, there's so much to unpack here, and I think that the first thing that's sort of the interesting technological question, because they introduce the Borg nanoprobes that can bring somebody back after 18 hours. I think Seven says that's really about the max, about 18 hours. First of all, it makes you wonder if in Star Trek from that point forward, if they can do that, do we now have this much bigger window if somebody is hurt that badly, if somebody, quote unquote, dies for 18 hours? But, oh, well, we figured out a way to get the nanoprobes to help them out. So there's that question. There's also Neelix's reaction to having that in his body. Is it invasive that something happened without his consent? We introduce this foreign agent into his body. Is there something worse about it because the Borg are, quote unquote, the enemy? So is it worse to have that technology in him as opposed to some benign medical technology that might have been developed from Starfleet he would have been okay with, but in this case there's a problem there. Does the source of the technology cause some problem psychologically for him to have it? Or is the technology just a thing, and then that value that you bring to it after the fact is purely subjective? There's also, I think, clearly an exploration of suicide in this episode. You get to the end, and Neelix is ready, kind of at the end of his existential crisis, to kill himself. He doesn't see the value in his life because he's so concerned with the lack of answers. He would rather just disappear. He's ready to beam himself out into the ether. And he gets talked down from that, and I think a very thoughtful way, by Chakotay. They put a button on it with the Naomi Wildman story, obviously, but that's the other kind of interesting element here. But ultimately, what I really respond to in this episode is the idea that Neelix has to find meaning without applying a supernatural layer to his beliefs, his worldview. They're very clear in this episode about setting up that the Great Forest is something central to the supernatural, quasi-theological beliefs of Neelix's people. When we die, we all go here, and everybody who ever loved us is there. And clearly, as we always say on Mission Log, Star Trek is a show about us. Those people are us. So they're making a parallel to human belief systems and human worldviews. And then when Neelix dies and comes back and realizes, oh, wait, I died and that didn't happen. I didn't go to that place. Now I have this crisis of faith, and I have to figure out what that means. And he goes through all these stages that are, I think, emotionally believable. He's despondent. He's angry. I love the scenes where he has decided that he wants to end his life, and he's trying to make peace with other people around him, like Seven. So he's got a lot, certainly as an actor, he's got a lot to do, but I think those steps, again, compressed into this 42-minute TV show, they're compressed, but I think they are believable, and they are able to hit a lot of different emotional responses from him. But ultimately, he has to decide, with the help of his crewmates, who, by all accounts, do the right thing here, that life has to take on a new meaning that can't solely be defined by what happens after I'm gone. I think that's profoundly important. And it's something that I've tried to absorb and really internalize in the way that I look at the world, the way that I look at life, and the way I look at humanity. People like me who don't adhere to a faith system, to a supernatural belief system, it can be really challenging, particularly as that belief system kind of evolves and develops, and you start to embrace and understand it. But something that's so important to me within that is to realize that everything that happens now is so much more important, because I don't necessarily put a lot of stock into what happens after. And I'll share with you one of my favorite quotations of all time. It's Craig Venter, who was a scientist who was a huge part of the Human Genome Project, mapping the human genome. And he did an interview with Rolling Stone. This is probably more than 10 years ago. And the writer of the interviewer asked him, what is the meaning of life? Because here's a guy who's unraveled DNA and he mapped the human genome. This is an incredible scientific discovery. And what he said was so simple, but I thought so absolutely right. He said, life has no meaning. Lives have meaning. And I love that, and I love to share it with people, because what he's really saying is, look, cosmically, life, just the idea that there is life, that things are alive, it really doesn't mean anything. You don't need to ascribe a meaning to that, just that life happens in the universe. Presumably the universe, not just here on Earth. But lives are what actually matter. The lives that touch other lives, the lives that touch you and me as individuals, that's what really has meaning, because we ascribe meaning to it. And that's what Neelix learns here, is not the importance of what happens later. It's like, wow, I'm on this ship right now. I have this gift of life right now. And my presence here affects everybody, by whether it's just being a friend, or being the cook, or being somebody who has value on a mission, or the guy who tells Naomi Wildman, there's no monsters under the bed, I'm going to tell you a story so you can go to sleep at night. I think all of that is lovely, beautiful stuff that really speaks to the humanistic version of Star Trek, which is to say that everybody there has a place, everybody there has meaning, and they all have meaning because of the relationships they have with each other. There's my monologue.
It was very eloquent, I must say. I think it is interesting that they would pick Neelix as the way to communicate this story, because he is. There are times he can get borderline annoying. Mm-hmm. I mean, no question. And I realize he's written that way, for a reason. But at the same time, to pick that particular character, and then to have him turn to Chakotay as a spiritual guide of some kind, and almost to reject part of that, or jump to his own conclusions. If there was one thing, and I know it's a TV show, and I know it's 42 minutes, and there's certain limitations, I wish that they could have given just a little longer sense of time, because it seemed like there was a very quick jump from I'm going to try to explore this to there's nothing and I'm going to end it all.
Right, right.
But other than that, I think it did a real good job, as you said, of compressing those various stages. Happily, I've never been to that point where I was seriously contemplating and
Right,
doing away with myself.
right.
But at the same time, there are a lot of people that have, and I absolutely do not mean to make light of it.
Yeah.
And the people that are in that situation struggle to find those meanings, and sometimes they don't,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I think that's so interesting about this is that they really compress a lifetime worth of that search into a couple of days of the characters' lives, but then for us, the viewing audience, 42 minutes of entertainment. And that moment with Chakotay, to me, really represents what a lot of people go through, which is, and people in my own life who are searching for meaning outside, and they've gone from one religious point of view to another, and one philosophical point of view to another, and keep going from place to place to try to find it out there and look for somebody to help them. But well, I just need meaning, so guide me up to this point. So that moment with Chakotay, it's really short, and it's not the answer that Neelix wants, but it speaks to a kind of truth in that search, which is, oh, well, if this belief system didn't do it for me, maybe this other one will. I just need to sort of throw myself into it, see what comes of it. Boy, I really hope it has the answers. Oh, it doesn't. So I need to move on to the next thing. But if the next thing isn't there, or if I don't understand the support system that I have around me, that can really lead to this existential crisis.
And the fact that the conclusion, okay, I tried it once and it wasn't the instant gratification, which is something that is very prevalent in our society.
Yep.
For at just about every level. If I don't like the TV show that's on now, I'll go and look for another one. Instead of trying something or giving it a little time to develop.
Right.
It's got to work. It's got to work right now, or I'm moving on. And that's, I think we miss a lot with that.
Sure. Yeah.
One other point you made, though, you said Star Trek is always supposed to be about us. I was drawing a lot of parallels between the question over the Borg technology, the medical technology, and what we're seeing right now in the vaccination issues and some of the technology things that are developing where you're going to have artificial bones, artificial blood, artificial this, artificial that available to you. And some people are very accepting of those ideas, and some people are absolutely rejecting them, potentially to the peril of those around them.
Yeah, I mean, well, I kind of go back to what I said. I'm a firm believer that technology is a neutral proposition. Technology is a tool that exists, whether it's a hammer or the Macs that we're using to talk to each other, or the iPhone I'll put in my pocket later, all the way up to the most advanced computers in the world, to airplanes, to nuclear bombs. The fact that the technology exists is a neutral. We, and again, this is going back to Star Trek, posing the very difficult questions about who we are at the end of the day and how we will live up to the very high standards, hopefully, that we ask of ourselves and our fellow human beings. We're the ones who get to decide the value of that technology in the end. Nuclear power can be used to destroy cities and humans. Nuclear power can be used as quite possibly one of the saviors of the earth, because we keep burning stuff that puts nasty particulates into the air. I read something the other day that the lowest number of deaths per kilowatt hour of any type of energy source, anything, is nuclear. I was shocked, because this is comparing it to solar and wind farming, and of course coal and geothermal and hydroelectric, and the one that came down to the safest for humans was nuclear. Okay, well, so here is a technology that we need to explore to its fullest for the benefit of humankind, and realize that, again, the technology is just the technology. It is what we do with it. It is how we use it. It is how we are precautionary about it that's really up to us. And you mentioned vaccines, using technology to its fullest. Of course, you can open up interesting political conversations around that. That's gotten very interesting. I think that people who oppose mandatory vaccines are not necessarily wrong to an extent. Just to say, like, well, look, is it really right for anybody to say you have to do this to your body? But at the same time, I was saying the good of the many outweighs the good of the few. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
But there's an interesting analog there, too, in the debate as to whether they should implement the technology. Okay, so it's 18 hours. It's well beyond anything that has been done up to that point. And there was a brief examination of the moral question, and it had to be brief because obviously they were up against the wall time-wise.
Right.
And so, and honestly, I don't quite know how I feel about that, because that was imposing their beliefs on something. And of course, if you want to buy into the whole thing, there's a command structure there. The captain made the decision, and for a valuable member of the crew, for the benefit of the crew, and at least in her mind, the benefit of the crew member. But if the circumstances had been different, would that decision have been different?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Somebody who's dying in a hospital, who has not signed or expressed DNR, do not resuscitate, does the attending medical professional, are they expected to make every effort to save that person, even if it's experimental technology, if it's something that maybe doesn't have 100% success rate? Is that the expectation that say you or I might have if we're in that position? If we're not well and not responsive, maybe not able to consent to something, are we expecting our attending physician to go, I got to make this call. This person's life could be saved by doing this thing, even if it's unorthodox. And I kind of look at it that way. Yeah, the Borg technology, there is some question about that, about how it would affect them. Although Seven does say, like, I will modify these so they only behave in this way, which again, kind of cool, because I guess sort of like magic triple blood, you've invented a thing that you could keep using in Star Trek at that point. But then does the doctor look at that and say, well, yeah, look, if I had come up with the same kind of technology on my own, here's what we need to do. We're going to use the idea of a molecular sized robot that can go in and repair and do this, then I would have done that given enough time and resources. So is it better or worse that it just happened to come from the one Borg that we have on board?
Right. Yeah. There's so many different aspects to this. And when I watched it, I thought, wow, this is a really good, and it's the kind of episode I would expect John Champion to find and pick, because there are so many levels to it and so many questions that I'm still wrestling with. Your DNR example is a perfect one, because unfortunately in our family we have had some experiences with that, and the debate over the patient's wishes versus the doctor's charge to save lives at almost any cost.
Yeah.
And that can be tough. And here we have a situation where there was no pre-decision of any kind. So it's not quite a complete analog, but it's close enough to raise the question.
Yeah. Well, and I love that they let him struggle with that for a while, because you can kind of go into it with the assumption, okay, Neelix would prefer to be alive over being dead. you know, the Doctor and Janeway would prefer to have their crewmen there alive with them at this point. Presumably the other crew members of the Voyager would prefer that as well. But really it just comes down to, well, you put this thing in me. Well, how is that different than, say, Seven putting in nanoprobes that can do this job, this sort of internal repair, versus an artificial heart? That's a piece of design technology that a doctor can make a decision to say, I'm going to put this in you. It's an interesting, I don't think it's necessarily at that point an ethical question, but it is this perceptual question, again, about the technology just being a neutral, being a thing, but we perceive it in a different way. If it had just been a case where the doctor puts in an artificial heart, the perception is great. The doctor did exactly what he's supposed to do, which is to use this advanced procedure to save a crewman's life. But because the Borg are enemies, and we're not quite sure what nanoprobes do, or nanobots or nanites do at this point. We know they can do a lot of terrible things because they turn beings into Borg, and we don't want to be Borg, but we're able to save them. I guess one of the questions would be, after you've used that technology to save Neelix, and he's okay, can you get them out of him? Would that make it better for him?
Yeah, and it was, if I remember correctly, that was sort of left hanging because he was going to be requiring the treatments on at least an ongoing basis for a period of time. Whether that was going to be permanent or not, I don't know. And those are, I guess, the practical applications. And one of the reasons this is a TV show, because I don't think we ever saw the Borg nanites appear again in this particular capacity.
I don't think so. Not as a life-saving measure like that. No.
On the other hand, though, the Borg were always the enemy in the other shows, with a couple TNG exceptions with you. So
I think that's one of the smart things about Voyager, though, and it's one of the cool things that they did with Seven, is that, look, when you keep going back to the well and you introduce an enemy like the Borg, well, yeah, fans want to see the Borg come back, but you can only keep doing the same thing over and over again. And they introduce the Borg Queen to make it new and different. And of course, a lot of fans, like Ken, hate the Borg Queen. And I get their reasoning. I don't hate the Borg Queen, but I get the reasoning of why. But I think that was a cool thing to do with Seven, is to explore this idea of how far gone is the humanity of a character, and can you bring them back? And is there something good to be gained from the experience with the Borg? So they were able to explore that in a much more nuanced and detailed way by having that character there for 4 seasons instead of just a one-off like Hugh.
And at that point, I don't think Seven was completely not trusted, but maybe accepted as a character. That there was still a bit of that conflict because Jerry Ryan is still very abrupt in her decision making and the way she implements things. And okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it. Or not even why. This is how we're going to do it. The why is just because I said so.
Yeah.
So,
she's still a new character, and but I like that they keep a good amount of that, just her very binary thinking throughout the run. Obviously they soften that later as she becomes more human, but particularly at the beginning, it's just everything is very binary. We're doing this because it achieves this, done.
Right. Yeah, there's an objective. If you want to achieve that objective, here's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And here are the potential costs. although they weren't necessarily articulated to a great degree, the costs are sort of obvious to the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Exactly.
they dig deeper and show you that there were other potential costs. Because honestly, I'd forgotten about this episode and the implications of it and where they were going with it, and
Yeah.
didn't realize that we were talking about, the potential suicide issues and then the deeper, search for meaning of life issues. So
Yeah.
this was a really great episode of Voyager, and a great one for you to pick, John. Thank you.
Well, you're getting a little preview of Mission Log here. So 4 years from now, when we've circled around to this episode of Voyager, I mean, these are the types of topics that I want to bring up on that, because I don't think it speaks to me on a deeply emotional level, but I think there's something philosophical here that is so Star Trek, and it really is about the human experience.
Well, no, we should tell folks that, we really didn't do a lot of prep for this. I asked you to pick an episode. I watched it. We had no notes. We had no prior discussions. What you're seeing, folks, is it.
Yeah.
And that's why I was anxious to see how you would approach this. Would you approach it with a bit of a mission log mindset, or would you approach it from an entertainment standpoint? And that's sort of what I want to do on Trek Favorites, is just take the guest and let them drive the direction of the appreciation for the episode. And you drove us and stepped on the gas.
Cool, man. You got it.
So we've mentioned Mission Log a few times. I'm sure there's nobody out there that doesn't know, but just in case, I'll let you run down where folks can find you and what Mission Log is.
Well, thank you. I think there's a handful of people who don't know. Mission Log is a Star Trek podcast from Roddenberry Entertainment, and I have the great pleasure of hosting that with Ken Ray, who a lot of your friends and followers would certainly know from Mac OS Ken. So Rod Roddenberry, Gene's son, put me and Ken together 7 years ago, almost exactly 7 years ago, to develop a show that was about exploring the morals, meanings, messages, what I like to say is sort of the heart of every episode of Star Trek, in order, in series order, not in strict release order, but in series order. And we've done that so far, as I mentioned, with the original series, the animated series, which is fantastic if nobody has watched it, the Next Generation episodes, and then the TOS and TNG movies. Now we're in Deep Space Nine, and the goal here is to go through every series, every iteration of Star Trek, one by one, episode by episode, to really see what makes it tick. And at the end of the day, what makes the episode hold up, if it does hold up, and what does it say? What is that philosophical or moral issue that it's trying to deal with? Not every episode does. But if we've gone through it all, then kind of how do we paint the big picture at the end of it all to say this is what Star Trek means? And you can find us at missionlogpodcast.com and find all of our shows at podcast.roddenberry.com.
Where do folks get in touch with you, John? Do you prefer going through the Mission Log contact situation, or do you prefer Twitter or Facebook? Or
I'm most active through Mission Log, but certainly on Facebook, John Champion, and on Twitter less so, but I'm at DVD Geeks, and then on Instagram you can look up John Champion, and there I am.
Great. John, thanks so much. I really appreciate you diving into this and not knowing what we were getting into. I think it's really interesting. You gave me a couple things to think about, and hopefully we've given everybody else a few things to think about as well.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. It was a real pleasure. And, what a just sort of a light conversation to have on a Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. No messages here at all.
No.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Folks, I hope you will continue to join us for Trek Favorites. We want to know what you think about what John said, what I said about this particular episode, and tell us what your Trek favorites are. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter, both at Trek Favorites. Let's hear from you. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.